What's up, guys? Travis Turner here. Just wanted to make this video for you to help you know exactly what to do with a buyer set contract documents, right? So you're working with a buyer, you're trying to walk through the contract, and you want to make sure that you're giving them the right information, how to walk through one, how to use it as like a negotiation tool, each blank, each section, because it's really important if you're working through a contract that you know how to explain it to somebody or a buyer. Sometimes you may get involved with an attorney that's a client and they're asking you questions on the contract. If you don't know your stuff, yeah, it's important to know what you're doing. So we can start with, here's the first document we'll start with. So residential buyer tenant representation agreement. This is your buyer's rep, okay? Typically your client name goes here. So if I'm my own client, Travis Turner, you can put my own home address if you'd like here. A lot of times I just leave this information empty. You can put their email and their cell phone. That's probably about the most important information you can put on this section here. Broker, it'll usually have pre-filled with this information. You can do backslash and your name. Address is already pre-filled. You can put your phone number. You can put your email. It starts auto-populating the more you do it. So that's the party's information here. Definitions, it's talking about where the property is and how you're going to get paid. So market area means that the area in the state of Texas specifies as follows. Typically, if we're in Lubbock, we're going to put Lubbock area. Pretty vague there. Term, this agreement begins on, this is the date of our buyer rep agreement, which you want to have this date predate whatever your contract is. So let's just say we're representing somebody and we're going to write an offer, or we made them. Here's our buyer rep. You can do it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, any set of days you want. Typically, this is probably a 30 to 90-day contract that you'd put here. Broker's obligations, pretty self-explanatory. Client obligations, you can read that in this blank. If you just press space and then backspace, it'll auto-populate the names of the clients and the agent, and you can just fill that in here. Broker's fees, when earned and payable, client will pay broker, right? So this is the buyer will pay the broker 3% or 100% of 1 month's rent, right? If we're doing a purchase, we're going to go ahead and do 3% of the sales price, okay? Now, source of compensation. Broker will seek to obtain a payment of the fees specified in paragraph 7A first from the seller, the landlord, or their agents, right? So we're trying to get it from the seller or the broker on the other side first. And if nobody will pay the commission and that buyer still wants to purchase that property, this agreement says that the buyer would pay us our commission, okay? But when people ask, hey, do I have to pay you that 3%? Well, technically, this is signing them up for yes if nobody else will pay it. And most of the time in today's market, people are still paying on the selling side commission. So just make sure that you let them know that. And then if they don't want to purchase said house because they're not offering compensation for you as the buyer rep, you can have that conversation with your client like, hey, do we need to find something that can be affordable to you that you don't have to pay my commission, or you can negotiate it through closing costs. That can also go towards paying your commission, whatever you see fit there. Earned and payable, so nothing is due until we close at the closing table and finalize the contract with title. Additional compensation, we don't have anything here. This is just following new construction. Protection period for 30 days. This is just a quick run through. You're going to need to read this a little bit more fine-tuned, but protection period for 30 days. Basically, if they cancel the contract and they don't want to work with you anymore and they go to buy a house that you showed them within this 30-day period after you terminate your rep agreement, and it's one that you've already shown them, that they would still honor commissions. County, Lubbock County. Representations, you can read through that. Intermediary, everybody knows that allows you to represent something in your own brokerage. So if you're at Brick and Loft and the selling or the listing is with Brick and Loft, and you bring a buyer as a Brick and Loft agent to that listing, it allows you to intermediary that deal. Okay. Confidential information, you can't say anything that the buyer tells you to the other side, like, hey, I'd pay $5,000 more if they don't get back to us tomorrow. You can't say that unless they give you permission to share that. Mediation default, and if we get attorneys or if attorneys are being threatened to get involved, we'd all sit down and talk about it before we went through this and did that. Limitation of liability, so neither broker nor any other broker is responsible for or liable for any personal injuries or loss or damage to a person's property, right? Not caused by broker. So if the client falls and hurts themselves, it's going to be on their insurance. If they steal something, that's on them. Here's some just little addendas you can add, and then additional notices that they can read through, and then you'd sign a date here at the bottom. On the 1 through 4 contract, same thing. We have our sellers. So whatever, Travis Turner is selling to somebody, and you've got the buyer. Here's my name is auto pulling from the buyer rep, Travis Turner. You can put your lot. Let's just say it's lot 3, block 1 in Lubbock. Or here we go. Here's a good one. Far Preston Estates, county of Lubbock. You can find out the county. Here's where you put the city, and then you can have the full address right here, 1212 Preston Trails or something. And then you can put the zip code here. Exclusion, improvements and accessories. So anything that they've built in and drilled into the property that's not able just to be moved is considered an improvement or accessory. Those things stay with the property. Exclusions are where you can remove those things for the most part. If you put a pool in, you can't take the pool with you. But anything that's built in, shutters, you've got cleaning equipment. There are a lot of things are listed here. Your Ring doorbell, all that needs to be excluded. I tell clients, if you're going to list your house and you have those things, take anything that you want off and then replace it with something like standard, and then keep what you want. And that way you don't have to exclude anything. Because when people see something, they're going to want it. Sales price, this is where you put your down payment, cash portion of sales price buyer paid at closing. They're putting 10% down, let's say. So there's 10 grand. Sum of all financing, if they're getting a third party, which is a loan, or they're getting a loan assumption, which you'll rarely use if you're assuming somebody else's loan, or seller financing if they're getting private lending or something like that, or they're doing an owner finance deal with that seller, then you could use this one. There's an addendum for that. Third party financing, they're getting the rest of the money through the bank. Here's their 90 grand. That's the bank money, and then it totals it for you. This is your offering price of $100,000 that's pre-calculated for you. Leases, if there's a tenant on the property, you can do residential leases. Fixture leases, those are pretty rare in Lubbock. Natural resource leases, they're very, very rare in Lubbock. Fixture lease is if you have something like solar panels, propane tanks, security system that you could check that if there's an actual lease ongoing. Earnest money, typically 1%. This is negotiable. So let's just say it's going with Hub City title, and you can put the address if you want. I typically don't put the address. You can put your closing agent if you want, like this. Sarah, and I'll keep her under wraps. Earnest money, so typically be $1,000. Let's just say that there's multiple offers and you really want this house. Maybe you do $2,000, right? It's all negotiable. Or let's say that you're protecting your client. There's no other offers on the table. You're just going to offer them a decent price offer, and you're going to come in and cut it in half and say, look, I'll give you 500 earnest. See if the other agent catches it. It's all negotiable. They can counter this, and then you can just tell your client, like, hey, if they counter this, we may just bump up a little bit. Same with option money. Options what you lose during the contract. So this one makes way bigger difference of them canceling than the earnest money. So if they put $1,000 here, that's way stronger in my opinion, because they're going to lose $1,000 within those first 10 days of our termination period here in section B. So that is also negotiable. And in Lubbock, $100 is pretty normal, but you can change this to whatever you want to, especially depending on if you have multiple offers or other stuff coming in. Additional earnest money, we almost never do this. You can read about it, but it's just not something that typically happens. Your earnest money has to be delivered within 3 days of a contract execution. So executed date, remember, is if we send an offer and our clients have signed and then their client signed tomorrow would be the executed date. It's whenever both parties officially sign on the contract. And you have 3 days after that effective date to deliver earnest money to the title company, excluding weekends, if the final day falls on a weekend day when they're closed. Termination option B here, you get 10 days unrestricted right. If we're in a multiple offer situation, your client says, hey, I really want this house. Let's say it's a new construction house. You may do a 3-day option just to walk through it and run some faucets yourself. You're not going to get a full-blown inspection. Maybe you do 0-day option and you say, hey, look, I don't need an option period. I know it. I want it. It's awesome. And I have that conversation with my client. Hey, just letting you know, this is how you can present a super strong offer with the financing that you have attached where there are multiple offers, but you're not going to there's no right to back out. Are you okay with that? And if they say yes, then you can write it up. Maybe they're going out of town and you need 15 days. And that'll help them get back in town, come visit the property, get the inspection done, whatever. 10 days is typically standard. It ends 5 p.m. on the 10th day after the effective date, which we just went over. Here's your failures, C and D. We're not going to fail delivering our earnest and option. Make sure to stay on your client's butt to make sure that happens. Here's seller, buyer. This can be negotiated. Hub City, title. Sometimes people will counter back. The buyer pays for it. Usually this is about, there's a set fee for this that you can actually Google Texas title policy cost chart, and it'll bring up a chart with sales price of how much it's going to cost. You can read about the title policy here. Will or will not be amended or deleted from the title policy. This is having to do with the survey in response to the title policy. So it will not be amended or deleted. That's pretty easy. Like nothing's going to change. If it is amended to read chores in the area at the expense of the buyer or seller, it's usually a cost of, it's usually like a percentage of the total price. So like, I don't know, 11 cents a dollar, like 0.01 cent or hundredth of a cent or something like that per dollar or something like that. Anyways, you can look it up. That's terrible math. But it's pretty cheap. So a $150,000, $200,000 house is probably like $90, and then it goes up a little bit. It's basically saying if you have a property with acreage or there's a potential easement on the property, you can check this to check for those things and make sure that you don't have those. But if it's platted in a city lot and it's in the middle of the neighborhood or something, it's not going to need this. You typically do not need this. Survey, everybody knows a survey going to be done within about 2 weeks time, typically, and ordered. The first blank is the one that trips everybody up. So if you do this and you're wanting to be an agent for your buyer and you're saying, hey, look, we'll pay for the survey. Well, nobody reads this big bold section. If the seller fails to furnish an existing survey, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at the seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. So a lot of agents will check this and check buyers and assume that you don't know what this means. And hey, if you don't provide us a survey, yeah, it says buyer's here, but you didn't fulfill the first part of the agreement. So your seller is now paying for a new survey. So pay attention to this. And if you're representing a buyer offering to a seller, maybe check this, right? See if you can give it a go. Otherwise, number 2, buyer pays for one. Number 3, seller pays for one. Objections. A lot of people put single family residence in here if they're buying just a residential property. What this is saying is if something comes back on the title policy that is it's listed as a duplex lot or it's commercial or something and it's not single family residence, that they would have the ability to back out, which if it's a platted lot, once again, it's built since the 80s, 40s, 50s, 2000 even. It's not really, it's already a single family lot. Everybody knows that. So not going to be a big deal there. Title notices, membership in properties owners association. So the property is or is not subject to mandatory membership in an owner association. This is an HOA. Is it an HOA or is it not? You can find a lot of the bylaws you used to could on the MLS. I bet they're still there somehow. We'll have to figure that out. Or you can check with the listing agent. They're likely going to have some of them. They can check with their client. And then you can get those. Statutory tax districts. We are located in Lubbock tax. Tidewaters, they are not applicable in Lubbock. Annexation, typically most properties are already a part of Lubbock County. And if not, it just says that, hey, they may end up eventually annexing your area if you're outside city limits. You're in a utility or service provider if you have city utilities. Public improvement district, this is like Preston Manor. This is like a lot of the newer Beaton Bow neighborhoods. It's called a PID, Public Improvement District. It's a fee that's paid through your taxes. And if you have this, then you'll just have to have a notice, which you can put in section 11 right here. No transfer fees in Texas. If you got propane gas, you just got to let them know. And water level fluctuations isn't in a flood zone. Property condition, access, inspection, utilities. You're legally allowed to get an inspector in there at reasonable times. You can't send them at midnight, right, to a seller's house. But during the day, you're fine. Seller disclosure notice. Have you or have you not received a notice? Multifamily is not required. Duplex, triplex plus is not required to have a seller disclosure in Texas. And so typically you check number 3. If you really want to ask for one from the seller, you can still check number 2. A lot of people don't know that about multifamily, and you can still get a seller disclosure. They're trumped by an inspection. Once you get an inspection, the seller is pretty much off the hook for that seller disclosure unless they blatantly lied on something that didn't get caught. Inherited property is also not required to furnish one. Something that is owned by the bank or foreclosure will not have one. Disclosure of lead-based paint, if it's older than 1978, acceptance of property as is. This is a question that a lot of clients have on the contract when you're working through it. You're going to say, hey, Mr. Seller, or hey, Mr. Buyer. So you're going to accept the property as is on the contract, and we have our 10-day window or 7-day window or whatever our option period window is to negotiate the contract. We're going to get an inspector. We're going to get a report. We're going to go over that report, and then we're going to get an amendment, which means to change a contract or to change. And we're going to change the contract to repairs that we want to ask for. They're not mandatory, they're negotiable, but we can work with the seller and try to get you some stuff taken care of. But if you accept number 2 up front, this limits you without having the inspection done to what you see and what you know about the property already without seeing behind the walls with an inspector. So we want to accept it as is now, and then we're going to amend the contract later during our option period. Lender required repairs and treatments. These are FHA, VA required repairs typically done by the seller. These can be negotiated by both parties. I've had buyers send their families out and do it because they really wanted the house and the seller didn't have the money. Whatever you need to do to get these done, if they find those repairs, those have to be done prior to closing for the loan to fund. Completion repairs and treatments, all repairs have to be done before closing unless otherwise agreed. Residential service contracts, this is your home warranty, usually about a $650 minimum fee now. Brokers and sales agents, if you're buying your own house, you have to disclose that, hey, I am a realtor in Texas, or you technically put buyer is licensed agent in Texas, something like that, or seller. Closing, typically 30 days out. Let's just say we're going to do a exact 30 days out closing. Possession, so upon closing and funding, so you don't get the keys until the money is transferred and changed hands and title company funds. If we close on a Friday at 4 p.m., your chances of closing on that day are pretty slim as far as you getting the keys. If the seller is nice enough, they may still give you them so you can move in, but you don't legally have right to that property until we fund, which would likely be Monday. So just make sure if you're talking to your clients, you're setting up closing times. I usually don't like to close on a Friday for that reason, and I like to close as early as possible in the morning so they can have their house as soon as possible. Settlement and other expenses. This is your closing costs. Actually, we're going to go ahead and take a quick, here's how you can find documents. So let's go ahead and find another document. Let's see, this is it. There we go. Okay. So this has changed a little bit, so I want to make sure we had the up-to-date one. Settlement and other expenses. So this has changed, and it used to just have a blank just for closing costs. Now you've got commissions here. The reason for this is because the commission structure has changed where it's not always coming from the seller now, so they have the right to not have to pay broker compensation, but you can still request it as the buying agent. So a lot of people are saying, hey, how much compensation are you offering? That question really shouldn't apply, except for if you're saying, hey, is the broker or the seller paying commission? And if neither, then you can use this because this is the seller and the broker doesn't have any access to commission to pay you. So it'd be coming from the seller. So the following amount to be applied to brokerage fees that buyer has agreed to pay. The buyer's agreed to pay you 3% on the document. So you can put either a dollar amount specified here, if maybe they're doing a certain flat fee, or you can do percent of the sales price. 32 would be great. So it's agreed to pay 3%. And this, if you look at 12A, it says the following expenses must be paid prior to closing. Seller shall pay the following expenses. Seller expenses. And this is part of number 1. So the seller is agreeing to pay the 3% that the buyer said that they would pay you. It's coming from the seller because if the broker doesn't have a listing agreement with commissions paying another broker, then it would be coming from the seller. If the broker has commissions, let's say they negotiated 5 or 6% with the seller before they listed it and they agreed to pay a buyer agent, you would not put your commission in this blank because now it's coming from the broker, and instead it'd be coming from this page down here on page 10. You'd put your commission right here. Listing broker has agreed to pay other broker a fee of 3% or whatever your commission you agree to is. So you don't put it in both sections, which a lot of agents are doing that these days. Don't do that. Special provisions, typically nothing comes down here unless you need to put like an updated or modified legal description or something like that. But this is pretty rare to put anything here. Let me make sure nothing else is changed up here. Everything looks pretty much the same. Buyer accepts it as is. Here's your disclosure. Okay, survey's the same. Okay, we're good. So that's changed. So let's go back to where we were. Okay. Prorations, everybody knows taxes are paid at the end of the year in full. So if you're doing a closing middle of July, the buyer is going to be responsible for the full year at the end, but the seller is going to give a credit from Jan 1 to July, whatever your closing date is. And they're going to get a credit to the buyer on the HUD or the closing statement as a credit, obviously. So it'll less what the buyer owes at closing, but then they're going to write the full check in October, November, December-ish for taxes for that year. And they're based on the previous year's tax amount. Casualty loss, if the house gets blown up, that basically everybody can get out of the contract. Default mediation, if we're, once again, if attorneys get involved, we'd all sit down and talk about it before we actually get any of them involved and start going after each other. Escrow is talking about the title company, and you can go over representations, federal agreements. I typically don't go in depth there. Here's this is if you want to put your buyer's information, buyer one, and you can put their phone number, their email. If you're only representing the buyer, you probably don't have the seller's info. They can do that later. If you have a third party because you're getting a loan, there's a lease on the property because it's an investment property or something. And then if you want this addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal, if it's a conventional loan, if it's an FHA or VA, you're not going to need it. This protects a client based on the appraisal. Addendum for sale of other property. I'll go over these real quick. This is one for your contingency. So if you have somebody needing to sell a house to buy another one, this is the one you're going to need. If they're subject to a property owners association and they're an HOA, you're going to need that. If it's an owner finance, you need the seller finance. If the seller is going to occupy the property after closing for a couple of days or whatever, you're going to need a seller's temporary residential lease. Short sale would be from the bank. If you end up having to, or if there's a short sale going on with a foreclosure, you'd take that. I've never used this one, so don't ask me this one. This one here is pertaining to the lead-based paint, 1978 or older. Yeah, we need that. If it has a propane gas, okay. Regarding a fixture lease, they have a solar panel system, right? Obligation to pay public improvement district assessment. That is your PID. If you have a property falling in that, if they're doing a 1031 exchange and they're buying, typically what this is if they're selling a business or a commercial building or a package of property or even a single rental property that has good equity, they're going to 1031, meaning they're going to kick the tax implications down the road and they have to buy another property. You're going to have to do addendum for section 1031 exchange. I've never used environmental assessment, but it's there. I've never done hydrostatic testing. We don't have coastal area property here. Backup contract, if you're submitting an offer that's already got an offer in place, you can still submit an offer. It's called a backup contract. You can check that here. Loan assumption, if you're assuming the person's loan. Buyer's temporary lease, if the buyer is going to go ahead and assume or going to stay a couple or days early before closing. Like sometimes your buyer's like, I need to get in there 2 weeks before closing and I'll pay. Usually there's a lease involved with that. I'll pay X amount and then you get this temporary lease built and you can have a deposit and a lease amount. If you had attorneys, that would go here. Here is your executed date. As you can tell, there's one thing on this whole page. So this is a pretty important date. Once everybody signs, if you're submitting an offer, you don't fill this in. You wait until whoever the last party is with the last agreement that agrees would typically fill the executed date in. So we send an offer, listing agent says, hey, that's good. We submitted on the 24th. We don't hear back till the 26th. 26th is our executed date and everybody's signed and then we're good to rock and roll. Here's where the broker's information goes. You put your information on the buying side and theirs on the selling side. If you're obviously the selling side, you'd swap that. And if you're doing one in-house with brick and loft as each agent, you keep everything on the right side. And this would be your intermediary. So seller and buyer's intermediary, and then listing association, and then you got the selling association's name, and you put all of the information here on the right. There's your commissions we talked about, and then here's the title company's page that they're going to run through here. So let's go ahead and cover the third party real quick. So the type of financing, right? So we got conventional. If we're doing a conventional loan, this is typically whatever the loan amount is. Ours was $90,000. If they're living in it, it's a 30-year note. If they're investing as their first-time investment, you need to check because it could be a 30-year mortgage. If they're doing a commercial loan, it's going to be a 20-year. You'll have to find that out from their lender. Rent rates not to exceed, depending on what the interest rate is. Let's say it's 6.25. As far as like primary loans, your investment loan will be about a point above that. So 7.25, maybe 7.5. If they're doing a commercial loan, it may be higher, closer to 8. You usually want this about half a point to a point above what the rates will be. This is saying like if rates just blow up before they can close and it goes past a certain amount, you have a chance to get out of the contract. So we need to have a little bit of wiggle room there. And loan origination charges not to exceed what amount. This is what the lender's going to be getting paid. Want to exceed 1% of the loan is typically what we put there. Second mortgage, this does not mean they're buying another house. This means that if they're getting another lien on their current home that they already own. So you're pretty much never going to use this. Texas Veterans Loan, that is not a VA loan. That's a different type of loan. FHA insured, this is 203B is the number you put here, the letter associating that loan. You can put your loan amount. It's going to be 30 years almost every time unless they opt otherwise. It's going to get a better interest rate, probably 6.25%. So we put that there, right? Not to exceed 1% of the loan. VA guaranteed financing, kind of the same story, except for they get 100% financing a lot of the times. So they wouldn't have a down payment on page one. It'd all be under the loan amount and not less than 30 years to, not to exceed 7.25% for the first 30 years of the loan. Origination charge 1%. USDA, once again, 100% financing if they want it. Sometimes people will be putting down a down payment. You have to ask these questions of what they're going to be doing. So 30 years, not to exceed 1%. Here's your loan amount again. Reverse mortgage. If you have one of these, call me. Don't do these for your clients. Do it for your client if they really need to, but these are no bueno, as a lot of people have seen. Other financing, if you're going to get a seller finance deal, you could put that here, but there's also a seller financing document. So that's what I would use instead. Approval of financing. This is saying, is the contract subject to buyer obtaining approval? Yes, it is. How many days? A lot of people put 15. If you're representing the seller and you see a contract come in from a buyer and they've got like 30 days in here, you want to counter back on this. You don't want them to have that long to back out due to financing. I typically stay between 10 and 15 days is okay. But yeah, typically 10, same as the option period. And so here's FHA VA. This is the appraisal protection on an FHA and VA document or loan. So let's just say that whatever your sales price is, so ours is $100,000, that would go here. This protects them on an appraisal. If we don't have protection on an appraisal, we're going to need the addendum. That's the last one I'll go over. Addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. So we've got a waiver. If your buyer is buying a property and there's multiple offers and he doesn't give a crap about what it appraises at, he's going to buy it or she's going to buy it and pay whatever the difference is. So we know our appraised amount is what the bank's going to loan. So if our house is $100,000 and it appraises for $90,000, there's a $10,000 gap that has to be made up in cash by one of the two parties. The buyer, if they check this one saying, hey, I'll pay that extra $10,000 if it does appraise lower or whatever the difference is, I'll pay that in cash. I don't care. Okay. Partial waiver. Hey, I'm buying it for $100,000. As long as it appraises for at least $95,000, I'll make up the gap. If it appraises lower than $95,000, we have to renegotiate it or I can back out of the contract. Or additional right, which is the most standard, is, hey, during our full contract period, whatever that is, it could be 30, 35, 40 days, right? Let's just say ours is 30. It has to appraise for sales price of $100,000. If it does not, then I get to deliver a copy and get my money back, or we can renegotiate the price. This is the most typical, the most protection for your buyer. But if you're in a multiple offer situation, sometimes you may play in this field up here. So that'll give you a little bit of a description on contract, how to use some of it to negotiate a deal and explain some of the parts to you. And then this way you can regurgitate this information to your client, but you need to know and understand this so that you can make sure that we have prepped and ready to go buyers that understand the contract so it doesn't come back on you. So